The game is done. Arsenal win this 2-0. They beat PSG on the night 2-0. And if I had to describe this game, honestly, in just a few words, for me, it's typical Arsenal. Honestly, it's typical of what Arteta is kind of turning this Arsenal team into, guys. I'll be real. PSG, they huffed, they puffed, they played some really nice, intricate passing throughout that game. The midfield that they put out, Vitinha, João Neves, Warren Zaire-Emery, those are three very technically able players that at times, they really had a good hold of possession for PSG. But PSG massively lacked any sort of incisive kind of play. And it's kind of been a big worry for me since Kylian Mbappe left the club. Like, yes, some people have argued that is the play more fluid now that it doesn't really go through one guy? Perhaps. But in Champions League, having that kind of player that in a moment can kind of win you a game, just due to individual brilliance, will always be the difference for me between the good teams and then the really, really top teams in this competition. But one thing as well, right? You can talk about PSG's lack of incisiveness and how predictable they kind of were at times, but I don't think you can kind of take anything away from Arsenal at the same time too, right? I want to be very careful in saying that because sometimes I'll talk about a game, right? And I'll say, oh, this team didn't do enough, this team didn't do enough. And they're like, well, why you can't give any credit to the other team? It's not always mutually exclusive like that. So PSG, I think, really lacked that killer pass, that player that could really grab the ball and make something happen. Barcola looked really bright at times, but never really had that final action to this game. However, Arsenal, there's a reason why teams against them don't look very incisive. These guys defensively, man, they're amongst the best I've seen, I have to say. And for a number of reasons, right? The way they defend, the pride that they take in defending. These guys absolutely all love defending. And I think that's the biggest thing for any defender, right? Yes, organization is important. Yes, tactics are important. Yes, technique in terms of defending is important, but the want to actually defend, like the adoration in defending, is something that can't be taught. And that's the number one thing more than anything. The focus that you show, the intensity that you play with. Arsenal love defending, and that counts for something, bro. And the way they defended today, right? PSG barely had a sniff, man. Honestly, I don't know what the possession stats are kind of saying after this game. I honestly have no idea. Maybe it would be even. Maybe PSG had a little bit more possession. I'm not too sure. I haven't really checked it out. But for all the possession that they had, the best chance that they got came off a set piece off João Neves, which is really just a flick off the bar. Like it's a half chance, really out of nothing. In terms of actual open play chances, the best ones they got was like a pop shot from Mendes. Excuse me. Is that really it? Genuinely, that's all I can really think of. And I think a huge deal of that has to be due to Arsenal's defensive ability, man. The way they defend off set pieces, the way they like to sit in a deep block if they have to, the way they kind of press from the front as well. I didn't think Arsenal this game really got out of first gear. I really didn't. But one player I really want to touch on, and he had a massive part to play for the first goal, was Leandro Trossard, who, since the injury to Martin Odegaard, has kind of occupied, and we were talking about this in the chat during the game, during a watch along we just did. He's almost playing as like the second striker in this system while Odegaard is gone, right? Like Arsenal are really playing like a 4-4-2 in their defensive shape. And then when they're attacking, it's really almost like a 4-4-1-1 with Havertz up front, Saka and Martinelli on either side, and then Trossard really occupying the spaces in behind Kai Havertz. And I think he's really found a role for himself there, right? Because I've always said with Trossard, yes, he's an amazing impact player, but whenever he tended to start for Arsenal out on the wing, I never felt like he really had the same impact on games. However, in this role that he's kind of played in the last few games, I think, look, he had the red card against City, which wasn't great, but I think he's given Arsenal some really, really good minutes this campaign. And his role in the first goal, it can't be underestimated, man. Picking up the ball near the halfway line, evading Desiree Doué, kind of shifting in and out before eventually cutting in and crossing perfectly into Kai Havertz's head. I did think Donnarumma for both goals, but specifically the first one. Look, who's to say whether Havertz scores if Donnarumma stays on his line or not? We'll never know, right? He might have well done that. But I feel for any goalkeeper, right? If that was my team playing, I'd be disappointed if my goalkeeper comes rushing off his line like that and doesn't get any contact on the ball. Like, cross like that, if you come out, you better either claim it or you better punch it the hell away. To do neither of them and to really just flap at it weakly when you're like 6'7" and like Kai Havertz get a free header on goal to basically a goal that had nobody in net. For me, it was really poor from Donnarumma. I didn't think he did much better for the second as well too. Set piece, again, which is just Arsenal's bread and butter right now, but it wasn't your typical Arsenal set piece, right? It's not one of them ones that Ben White is holding onto the goalkeeper and Gabriel leaps above everybody. It was really a case of crowded bodies at the near post. Saka's cross-come shot, like, doesn't really touch anyone. Looked at it at the time, like, it sneaks its way past Donnarumma, who, again, I just don't think is imposing enough whatsoever in goal. And they were asking me in the chat, what do I think of Donnarumma? I think he's obviously a good goalkeeper. He's not a scrub. But do I consider him an elite goalkeeper? I really don't. And I think that's disappointing to say because at one point, Donnarumma was really considered like the next in line to take Buffon's position for the Italian national team, which he's gone on to do. I think he had a good Euros, to be fair to him. And obviously the Euros before that, he was incredible. But I really don't think he's actually become the goalkeeper that when he made his debut for Milan at 18 years old, we all kind of expected him to be. I think he has kind of either regressed or at the very best stagnated. And I don't think he's ever really lived up to that early potential that we saw from him. And I thought today, again, he's had some howlers in the Champions League the last few seasons personally. And I think today was another one to kind of add to the list. But yeah, like I said, I didn't think Arsenal on the ball were anything spectacular. And I don't think they really had to be. I think you look at PSG today, and the perfect way to describe them is that they're neat, they're tidy, they're very intricate in possession. The three midfielders that they have, and even Fabian Ruiz who comes on, they like to keep the ball. They're good in tight spaces, but none of them have a real killer pass in them. None of them really can get on the ball and drive past a few players and really ask questions of an opposition defense. None of them seems to have a strike from 40 yards out, 30 yards out until Fabian Ruiz came in and he has an eye for goal. It just all seemed a little too obvious from PSG, to be honest with you. And again, the front line as well too. Desiree Doué, he's bright, he's exciting. Same with Kangin Lee, same with Barcola, who's had a really, really strong start to the season. But I still think PSG to really do something in this competition this year, which I don't think they're going to. I think they're missing that guy. And that's not to say it had to be Mbappe. At one point it was Neymar for them. At one point it was Zlatan for them. At one point it was Cavani for them. This PSG team, I think they're a year or two away. And it's a fun team. It's a young team. It's an exciting team. It's more of a team than it maybe has been in previous years. But still, at the end of the day, top-level football, and the Champions League in particular, will always be decided by superstars. And I don't think PSG has one, at least not in attack. But yeah, man, PSG, I'm worried for them, right? Because I look at the games that they still have in this competition, right? And if I bring them up right now, so they won the first game, barely, by the way, against Girona. 90th minute own goal from Gazzaniga for Girona. So they got lucky in that game, if we're being real. Today, they don't get so lucky. They lose to Arsenal, but it doesn't really get easier. I guess the next game against PSV is must win for them. Then they go and host Atletico Madrid. Then they travel to the Allianz Arena against the Bayern team that's in red hot form. Then they go to Austria. Then they host City. And then they go away to Stuttgart. I'm a little nervous for PSG, man. I'll be real. I don't think that's a great set of fixtures, especially for a young team that's really still trying to kind of find themselves post-Mbappe. And I get it, in the league they've been brilliant. But we all know with PSG, since QSI came in 2012, the league has never been an issue for them. It's always been translating that form into Europe. And I look at this set of fixtures with this current PSG squad. Again, they're fun to watch. They're exciting. It's a good young project. But I worry for them in the Champions League this year. And I think they're a bit lucky that this year, if you look at the format, which we can do right now, 1 through 8 qualifies automatically. 25 down to 36 is eliminated at the first hurdle. And 9 through 24 advances to a playoff. I think PSG are going to finish middle of the pack in this playoff run, man. I don't think they're going to finish 1 through 8, definitely not. And I think even the top spots in the playoff, I think they'll struggle to really make that. So yeah, that's that on PSG, man. But as for Arsenal, right? I started the first game that they played against Atalanta kind of saying that I worry for them in Europe because as good as I think they are in the league, and I think they will challenge City till the death, and I think that Rodri injury actually makes them maybe even favorites for the league, dare I say it. But in the Champions League, I still think that they're missing that little bit of X factor, that attacking brilliance from their front line that can kind of lead them all the way to the competition. However, if Arsenal are going to make a real run at this Champions League, what they do really have going for them in their favor is the fact that I don't think there's a better defensive team in this competition. I really don't think so. And if you look at those Atletico Madrid teams of the mid-2010s, that went to the Champions League final. Who was their real X factor? I know Diego Costa had a really good campaign in 13-14. Griezmann was very, very good in 15-16. But for the most part, outside of those two, and you could argue, does Arsenal even have a player of that status? That's up for you to debate, right? But what made those Atletico Madrid teams so brilliant was the defensive resoluteness, was they had a goalkeeper in net that was just playing out of his skin, which is similar to what Arsenal do at the moment as well too. They had a midfield that was very, very concrete. They were very, very organized. They really understand their roles, whether it was Gabi, Saul, Koke, Carrasco at times. They just knew who they were. And they had a game plan. I look at Inter in the last run that they went to the Champions League final. Again, yeah, you can say Lautaro. Yeah, you can say Edin Dzeko. But let's be real as well, too. Very, very strong defensive team. Very organized midfield with the correct profiles, the right balance. You had a Dzeko and a Lautaro that could grab you the odd goal. No real X-factor crazy player. They didn't end up winning the Champions League. And that's not to say Arsenal will either. But if Arsenal are going to have a deep run in this competition, it's going to have to come from a similar style in which those two teams did it. And they ultimately didn't win the Champions League. So we'll go on to see how Arsenal does. But to make a deep run, that's the kind of identity that they have to 100% accept. And I think under Arteta, to be fair, they have accepted that they can be this kind of team. Nobody wants to face Arsenal because of how defensively rigid they are, because of how ugly they can make the game, because of how dangerous they are on set pieces, and how Arsenal love to suffer. And that's something I actually really like about them. Again, that's something I used to say all the time about the Atletico Madrid team. They don't mind going through periods of a game where they don't really see the ball. They have to kind of drop deep into their box. For 10 minutes, they have to defend on the back foot. They have to face a few set pieces, and they come out of it not suffering whatsoever. But this Arsenal team, bro, right? For all the great defensive teams we've seen, what makes this Arsenal team so good? They don't concede shots. They don't concede chances. Honestly, like, they defend well, but they don't really concede a boatload of chances. They have this guy in Raya who at the moment is probably the safest pair of hands in world football. Every single cross in the air is his to claim. You have Gabriel and Saliba. I was asking my chat today, what's even the point in crossing against Arsenal? Because those two head everything out. And if they don't head it out, Calafiori at the back post heads it out himself. Ben White at the back post heads it out himself. The midfield is incredibly difficult to play against. And then they find a way of getting it done offensively as well too, man. Look, they're not the most fluid team to watch at all times. At times they are. But in these big games, they're not the most fluid Wenger early 2010s team. But they find a way of scoring goals, man. Honestly. So, do I think Arsenal are going to win the Champions League? I don't, personally. I think this is a year too early for them. And I think they still need to invest in this front line. I think Arsenal will fall short this season in the Champions League. But could they make a deep run of it? I think potentially. I think it depends on who they end up facing. Like, if they face a City, if they face a Madrid, if they face even a Bayern again, it could be difficult for them. But I expect them to go far. Is there any other individual performances we can think of from PSG Arsenal that are worth touching on? I think the wing backs for PSG were quite good. Hakimi and Mendes, I think they looked really good today. Barcola, I just think is growing from game to game. As for Arsenal, I thought Partey had one of his better games this season, and I think it was very interesting as well too to see Mikel Merino make his debut for Arsenal today, because that's a big one. That's a big addition. Yeah, Timber, very good in the first half. Timber, let's see what kind of injury he's facing, because I think missing him, that's a big one. Look, I know they have Ben White to come into the team, and he's no schmuck, but Timber, wow. Watching him in that first half, the way he defended against Barcola, very, very impressive. And I think the minute he came off, Barcola kind of woke up in that game. I think he much rather fancied the task against Calafiori than Yuri and Timber, who, when I look at him, right, for a winger like Barcola, who's honestly one of the best 1v1 threats in world football at the moment, a player like Timber is so difficult for him because he's short, he's nimble, he moves side to side very well, he shuffles very well, he's very concrete, he's a very strong kid, good on the ball as well too, but just defensively, I feel like it's such a tough task for these fast twitch defenders, man. Like, Ben White for me today would have been ripped apart by Barcola. We've seen Ben White against the likes of Mitoma, against the likes of Rashford, these high volume dribblers. Boy, he struggles. Timber, I think, is the perfect matchup for those kinds of players.